Hi, my name is Cindi Rang. We have a large quilt shop in central Washington state. And if you're new to our channel, we do a lot of YouTube videos that feature quick quilts, easy tips and tricks, and just a lot of just basic information that everybody should know. So today we are going to show you this fantastic quilt called Hope Floats. My daughter and I have owned and operated a busy quilt shop in Washington state for over 20 years. We have a retreat center, an active YouTube channel, and a large pattern line featuring our creations. My two sons work on machines. One daughter-in-law is our videographer and the other is a long-arm quilter. We are a family that love each other, we laugh together, and every once in a while we get some work done. We have a crew that are saints for their efforts at keeping us on track. Thanks for joining us on our wild ride. So the quilt block looks like this, and the quilt block goes together so fast, and it makes a big 14-inch block, which means that your quilt gets really big really fast. And I think that the original name of this block was actually Bright Hopes, but since we're doing a floating seam to it, we decided to name it Hope Floats. So that's where the name comes from. But it's a really nice block because the large pieces, of course, make it, again, easy to piece very quickly. But the other thing that's really nice about a quilt block that has large pieces is that if you have a fabric that you just love and you really kind of want to show it off, you want to show off the color, you want to show off the genre of fabric, it's really nice when you have some pieces that are 4x10 or 6-inch square. The other thing that's nice is we're always looking for a quilt block that will feature a panel. So I have a couple options. I just want to show you a little bit of just a few tricks about picking fabric. So first, let's look at some panels. So panels come like this. This one, for example, has the full alphabet. This one has a bunch of kind of antique tractors, and this one is really cool flower prints. So what'll happen is sometimes the panel is very specific and it gives us a cut line, and what you get is 24 inches by width of fabric, which is typically about 42 inches. Other times it's running yardage. And like this one, if it's running yardage, you already have your blocks, you already have kind of a little white sashing. You could kind of play on that a little bit if you want to, but it's really nice to be able to fussy cut these out and use the ones that we want to use. There's lots of different options. This one is another one, another Kim Deal one, same artwork as this gal. So a couple things, and I'm going to show you some tricks in just a few minutes about how to deal with these panels and how to cut them into a usable shape and size. But before we talk about fussy cutting, which is something that everybody has to be able to perfect, I want to talk to you about a couple other fabric choices. When we wrote the pattern gives you a couple of different options and a couple of different layouts for blocks. And you could do something a little bit scrappier if you'd like to. The pattern calls for 8 either 3rd-yard cuts if you just want a 56 by 56 size, or 8 half-yard cuts if you want 56 by 84. And that measurement is before border. So you could really easily get it to a king-size quilt, and you could easily make it in a day. The 8 fabrics is what's going to give you kind of a lot of pattern with your fabrics. But if you want something a little bit scrappier and you want most of the cutting already done for you, we also give you directions for using a layer cake. If you're using a layer cake, you will have a little bit of waste on one side, but you can cut most of your block units with this. All you'll need is a half-yard of fabric that's going to go in your centers, the part that we're going to fussy cut. So let's talk about that also for a second. This block has, again, our outside pieces and this center, which could just be a really cool fabric that you really like. It can be multiple different fabrics that you like. It can be something we're going to fussy cut, or you might find something that's just sort of an all over. I don't know why I kept shopping in the kids section. So a lot of what I'm going to show you is really more youthful, but you can just imagine your own idea of something that you really want to showcase. So something like this that's an all over print, there's really a lot to look at. A fabric like this is something that it's not going to matter where you cut it. If we just cut this, our centers are 6-inch squares. So if we just cut a 6-inch strip, cut that across, cross cut that into 6-inch squares, wherever we have cut, it's going to be something kind of cool to look at. So you don't have to fussy cut out the penguin and fussy cut out the lion and fussy cut out some other character. Everything is going to be kind of cool for something to look at. This is another example of that. This is another fabric that just has this really cool all over print. So again, instead of worrying about fussy cutting, which is where you're going to cut a 6-inch square out and maybe put the tree or the alligator right in the center. If you do something like that, you end up wasting a lot of fabric. Whereas again, if you just go ahead and cut a 6-inch strip, cut it into 6-inch squares, it's a big enough piece of fabric that there's going to be something interesting in every single block. Your other option is to go something with something that's a little bit smaller print. You will have to pay attention to the fact that it's directional if it is. Oops, did you get that? Mm-hmm. I'm going to come back to this one because this is the one that I chose to use. So I'm going to show you this one up close. But this one is another one that no matter where we were going to cut this and no matter where our 6-inch squares or our 5-inch squares were going to be, we were going to see something really cool in this fabric. All right, so I'm going to show you first, we're going to come down here on the board and I'm going to show you what I mean by fussy cutting, because this will be the first step in the completion of your quilt. So I am going to use just my basic 6.5-inch non-slip ruler for doing my fussy cutting, but I do want to point out that there is a product called a Fussy Cut Ruler. It's made by Marty Michelle, and you can see that you can fussy cut a 6-inch block, you can do a 1-inch block, a 2, a 3, or a 4-inch block. And I'll kind of show you how this works as we go along, but I'm going to go ahead and use mine. One thing I like to mention about specialty rulers is that specialty rulers, they don't do that added step of putting on a non-slip surface. So if you have any grippy or omni grip, or even something as simple as the little fabric grips, and they're basically just sticky sandpaper, that works well too, because otherwise these things can be kind of slick. And when you are cutting something with such accuracy, you want to be really careful that they don't slip. So for me, I'm just going to use my regular non-slip ruler, and I'm going to show you how to use that. So what you're going to do is we're going to look at this fabric for just a second. And in fact, maybe I'm going to even put another piece down here so you can see what I mean. So you can see that this is printed. And so since it's printed on top of the fabric, almost like you would print on top of paper, you can see that it's not an extremely straight line. That happens all of the time. If something is woven, then you'll get a very crisp straight line. And sometimes like for plaids, that works out really well. But something that's printed, even when we want to cut it into a square, you might find that there's some really weird kind of angles to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you kind of how to deal with that. So what I need for the center of my block is a 6-inch square. And because of the space in between these blocks, I couldn't really get a 6-inch square and leave enough that would be for the next one, so that no matter what, it was going to be like 5.5 inches. The only other way that I could get around that is if I took the full black edge. So I had the full 6 inches here, which meant that I wouldn't be able to use this for my project. So for me, what I decided to do instead is I decided to do something called a coping strip. And so what that means is that I went ahead and cut out my block, and then I put my own little extra black border around the edge of it. And I'll show you that in a second. So what I decided to do is I decided to see how big I wanted this block to be, knowing I was going to get it up to that 6-inch size that I needed. So if I looked at this, it really looked like I could pretty easily do a 5-inch
trim. So what I want to point out that what I'm looking at is a couple different things. First of all, I'm making sure that everything stays straight. So if you can see where that 1/2 inch line is, and see if you follow that line all the way up, can you see that it is straight right on what would be sort of like that printed seam in between that blue and there. The same thing right here. Here's that little fine line that comes along. So I'm making sure that this line lines up, this previous line lines up. I've got the same one over here. I've got the same one down here. So I can kind of fuss with that just a little bit, just to make sure that everything is even within the block. The other thing is it's always kind of nice to see that in the center of the block, and then where I'm cutting around the outside edge, because I'm going to cut to 5 inches. So if I come over, this is my 5-inch mark, is right here and right here. And you can see I have just that tiny little bit of black all the way around. It'll end up being in my seam allowance. So you can see that everything is nice and even. So once I know that everything is nice and even, I'm going to hold down, cut up. I always make sure that my cut was made before I move my ruler. I'm going to cut across, and then I'm going to just go ahead and turn my mat so I don't have to pick up my block. Turn around my ruler because this is my straight edge and my straight edge. So I'm going to line that up on my 5 and my 5. So this is lined up right on the line. That's lined up right on the line. I'm going to double check before I cut. And people will ask all the time, well, why didn't you just line it up on the mat and cut around the mat? Things will slip when you do it that way. So we always put whatever it is that we're cutting, we put that underneath the ruler so that exactly what I'm cutting is exactly underneath there, so it comes up exactly the right size. All right, so I'm double checked. I'm at 5 inches. I'm going to cut across the side, cut across the top. And there is my Fussy Cut Y. Now, I know that I'm going to sew my little black pieces on the inside edge of this, so this is going to change this just a tiny bit, but I'm perfectly okay with that. I really like the way that it's turned out anyway. I'm going to do one more just so you can see this again. You can fast forward if you don't need to see this, but look at this one, how crooked that is. See how that's printed? You don't want to, people will think that what they need to do is starch the bejesus out of it and start pulling on it, stretching on it, pressing it. It's not going to change anything. That weft and warp thread is exactly where it's going to be, and it's where it's going to be after you wash it. So the problem is not that the fabric is stretchy. The problem is that it was printed just a little bit crooked. This does not mean that this is a bad fabric. This is a great, really good quality fabric. It's just part of the process. And so I'm going to just do the same thing. I'm going to line this up over the top. And sometimes what will happen, if you look up close at this, what you'll see, if we look at my 5-inch, can you see that right up here, I'm right at the corner of where my block is printed? But then if you come over, you can see all kinds of black right in there. That's kind of an indication that things are a little bit crooked. So what we're going to do is just in the inside here, the whole thing, this is a really good one to show because this whole block is really pretty crooked. So on the inside, I'm really not able to line it up. If I lined up the inside of the A, and the inside of the A, look how far off it is up here. I'm going to draw on that line so you can see it a little bit better. I'm clear down here and clear up there. So usually the rule of thumb is that we want to be able to hide any kind of issue in our seam allowance. So what I'm going to do, here's my 5. That's the line that we're looking at. And you can see that the black that's over here on this edge and the black that's up here and the black that's there, all of that is going to end up in my seam allowance so that I'll be able to hide that that block was so wonky. You'll never know that that block was wonky. If we look at this ruler, that's what this ruler is kind of showing. I think there's probably a glare there, but that's what it's showing you, is it has this little edge to show that we're not going to be able to see what's going on in the seam allowance around that 4-inch block. So here's a 4-inch, here's the center. You make sure that everything is lined up, and that's that seam allowance. So that's what it's doing here. You just have to know that you've got that 1/4-inch seam allowance, and you want to know where that is. So I would go ahead and cut this. So I've got my ruler right where I want it to be. Turn this around. I've marked all over my ruler, but I can still see it. And what I've marked on my ruler is with this wet erase mark. We use these all the time because then what happens is that mark doesn't come off onto my hand. It doesn't come off onto my fabric. But then as soon as I'm done with that mark, I just have to wet my finger and then that mark all comes off. So if I'm marking something to make sure that I know that my block has to be 5 1/4, I might just put little dots somewhere to make sure that all of my blocks are cut the same way. All right. All right, so here's my A. It looks a little bit crooked, but what's going to happen is as soon as we put on our seam allowance and we put on our coping strip, what's going to happen is everything is actually going to be lined up okay. So this is a coping strip, and you'll see these on the blocks when I show you in just a second. So what a coping strip is basically a border for your block. And so I think they were called coping strips because it gives you an opportunity to cope with the fact that your block is really either not fully square or not the right size, because maybe there's some sort of a panel that you want to use and you want to get your block up to 6 inches, but the biggest you can get your block is 4 inches. That's where you would put that coping strip on there, get it up to the right size and trim it down to the size that you need. And that's what we've done with our quilt. All right, so let's go ahead and look up here on the board and I'm going to show you what we've done. All right, I'm going to show you in just a second how we put these together, but I just wanted you to see the progress of what we've cut and how this ends up looking okay. You might have been a little nervous when I was showing you that trimming trick, but it works out good because once you fussy cut, here are the coping strips. So this is that little black border that we added ourselves, and then you can't really tell. That's kind of a crookedy eye anyway, so that block looks just right. If we look over here at the R, the same thing. So we've trimmed up this block to the 5 inches. We added our little coping strip. Here's our D. The D was super wonky. So, and you can kind of, if you really look closely, you can see that that D is sitting a little bit crooked there, but it looks right. And once everything is put together and once it's quilted, it's going to look exactly the way that it's supposed to look. So what we did is instead of putting up the whole alphabet, we're only doing 16 blocks because what we did was we picked the 8 third-yard cuts of fabric, which is going to give us 16 blocks for a finished size of 54 by 54. That's the measurement before, or 56 by 56. And that's the measurement before we put any borders on. We could make it a little bit bigger if we wanted to. So we knew that we didn't want to do just 16 letters in the alphabet because, you know, who do you leave out? So we decided instead to spell a few words. So you can see that we've got bird, we have fish, and I'll let you go down to the bottom. We've got hug and dog. So once we went ahead and made our little crossword puzzle of words, we knew that we still had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks that we needed to fill for these other centers.
So remember when I said that I picked this one as the one that we wanted to use? Well, this is the one. So if you look at this up close, in fact, I'm going to put it down here for you. Okay, this is that fabric. I love this fabric. It's kind of like a puzzle on itself. Do you see? Here's the iguana. Here's the monkey and the monkey's tail. Here is the alligator's face. There's his teeth. What's that? Here's a tiger. I think that that's a penguin. No, that's a toucan. Ha, that's a toucan. Here's your elephant and a panda. Anyway, I think it's like awesome. I love this fabric, and this is another one of those examples where you can just cut it. So at first I cut the 6-inch square thinking that's what I was going to put in there, and then we really decided that we really wanted that coping strip for all of the blocks, not just the letters. So we cut these down and we put the coping strip around these. So again, super simple. It's basically just a border for your block. You can choose any color you want to. We decided to choose black because if you noticed the kit that we put together, and we put these together in case anybody else wants to do the same thing, we just picked some really nice white with black because the fabric that we picked, we just really wanted the fabric to be shown off, and so we wanted something that was fairly modern for the background. But you can choose anything you'd like. You can choose things with all kinds of colors. It doesn't make any difference at all. Again, it's a great way to go ahead and show off a fabric line. The bonus with this pattern is the little cutting chart, which explains that as you're cutting out all of your units to make your block, you are also cutting out all of your binding. So you have all of these little pieces for your mixed binding. All you'll have to do is trim this down to 2.5 inches, sew it all together and press it and get it on your finished quilt. All right, I'm going to show you how these blocks go together. Again, we have a complete pattern on our website at fabricpatch.net. It has the full pattern on there with a cutting diagram, all of the directions on how to piece, and then a layout for using 8 of your 1/3 yard cuts or using 8 1/2 yard cuts, how much bigger you can get it. And then we talk a little bit about finishing directions. And this is what the pattern is going to show you. Once you have your center, all you're going to do is you're going to start your seam. But when you start your seam, you're not going to sew the whole thing. It's right sides together, and you're going to leave about 1 inch unsewn. Once you've sewn all the way at the top, you have this edge. That edge is where you're going to put your next piece. All of these are the same size piece. Once you've sewn this one on, you have this edge, and that's where you're going to sew the next one. Once you have this piece on, you have this edge, and you have that edge because this piece isn't sewn all the way sewn yet. So you'll add your last piece. You'll sew that on, and then after you've done that, you're going to come back. When you come back, you'll lay this down right sides together, finish that very first seam that you did, and that's your block. Just press it and you're done. Super, super simple. Couldn't be easier. So we'll look back up one more time at the finished quilt. We're going to go ahead and do just a little bit of sewing. Obviously we have a few more blocks to do, but you can see that each block, once you've got your cutting done, which doesn't take very long at all, each block can be pieced in just a matter of minutes. Probably the thing that took us the longest is the fact that we added this little individual coping strip around each of our blocks. If you were just going to go ahead and just cut up some pretty fabric and show off fabric, this is really a quilt that you could make the entire quilt top, finish all of your blocks, sew all of your rows together in just a couple of hours. And it's a really nice way, again, just to show off a really pretty fabric. So we're going to go ahead and get our other quilt blocks finished. We're going to get them in here, sew this whole thing together, and maybe we'll even surprise you with a border, and we'll show you how it turned out. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.